All right, let's grab a seat. Let's get started. All right, so before we get started, I want to introduce Jeremy Hans. So Jeremy is actually a local resident here in Pensacola. He's actual naval helicopter pilot. He grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. He wants to make his way back to Dallas. Who's from Texas here? Woohoo! Yeah, Texas. All right.
The best state.
Jeremy's married. He actually has his fourth kid on his way. So he's Yep. All right. We're excited to have you, man.
Thanks.
All right. Take it away.
Absolutely.
Can you guys hear me if I don't use this? Can you keep that up here? Just gonna keep it right here. All right, guys. I'm Jeremy. I'm gonna talk about multifamily investing and syndications. I've talked about this a few times, so I apologize if this is the wrong audience for the message, but my hope is to get through the slides quickly, and I talk a little fast, or you listen slow, so I'm sure we'll do that quickly and have a lot of time for Q&A. Navy helicopter by training. I started in this multifamily world kind of as my first go. My story starts back in 2007, graduated college, and got 2 career starter loans, which is something you can get as a military officer. You can take $50,000, well I took about $50,000, about 2%, invested all in the stock market, turned it into $10,000, and realized I'm the stupidest person I know for the next year and a half, right? So that started me down the path of like, what should I do next and not be an idiot? Read every book, read every blog, right? Got into real estate, moved to San Diego, and in San Diego I ended up finding that I wanted to do multifamily, right? I wanted to live in one unit, I wanted to house hack, as it's now called, I wanted to burr, as it's now called. I was doing that before, I'd ever heard those terms. So I wanted to go from houses to hotels. I'd played enough Monopoly to kind of know that. So a little bit about me. I was super cute as a kid. It's gotten worse as I've gone on. We had some great green sweats, which I'm really trying to redo this one this year with my own family. Flew the big helicopter here, and then I came out here and spent my last really 8 years flying the TH-57. But then this is kind of my dream project here. So the Navy's buying a new training helicopter, and I spent the last 4 years putting together the requirements and then actually getting the first one here. So this is my part-time job, which is kind of a full-time job for everybody else, but it's tough for the Navy to recognize that. So, and I got 3 kids, 4th on the way, wife of 13 years. So I'm Climb Capital, right? So why am I here? I started just really in 2020 as Climb Capital. Bob and I had met back trying to buy the same mobile home park here in town about 7-8 years ago. And I didn't know Bob, I knew of Bob. So I called Bob, I was like, hey, I'm trying to buy this mobile home park, blah, blah, blah. I hear you got some information. He's like, yeah, tell me which one it is again. He's like, oh yeah, I'm looking at that one tomorrow. I was dejected, right? I was like, oh no, this guy that I know is gonna steal this deal from me. I'm still pretty early on in my investing career. He was like, well, why don't we just work together, right? So we ended up working together on that deal. It wasn't a deal, but since then we've bought about 1,000 units together, sold a bunch of those, and now we're about back at about 850 units combined. About 50% of what we own is multifamily, about 25% mobile home parks, and about 25% RV parks. And our focus right now is really expanding the RV park, selling off the apartments, and then we're quickly moving into PE. So we have a $22 million business in town here under contract. We're trying to close by the end of the year. And if we close, it'll be really cool, and I'll put it all over the internet, but NDAs until then, right? So let's talk a little bit about multifamily. Does anybody here own multifamily or do anything outside of greater than 5 units? Okay, see, some of you guys already know this stuff. The reason I got into multifamily, I think Jeremy was asking me in the back, was like, how'd you get into this? Well, I'm an idiot, right? So I've owned 1,000 units and I've never picked up a hammer. Because if I picked up a hammer, I'd hurt myself or probably you, right? And so there's a lot of things I'm not good at. I don't do much marketing. I'm really just a spreadsheet and numbers guy. And so for multifamily, there's a whole lot of parts and pieces that need to be done. There's a whole lot of people that can do it too. And I'm sure you guys, especially focusing on single families, you deal a dime a dozen with realtors who should have no business being in the business, right? And so those people drive me nuts. I want to stay away from all the hairdressers, AKA real estate agents. And so I moved up to commercial real estate with the intention that nobody survives commercial real estate if you can't pay your own freight, right? If you can't actually do deals. And so most of the people that you're going to find in the commercial multifamily space, they're at least a step better on average, right, than the residential people. And so that's what I needed because I pitied the fool, right? And so the other thing that I really like about multifamily, commercial real estate deals in general, is that we can directly affect the valuation of the property outside of what anybody else is doing around you. And so I hate math, but if you put dollar signs in front of it, it gets a lot better for me. So just see all the dollar signs, you'll feel better here. So trying to determine the value of multifamily starts with understanding what we call the net operating income. And if you know this, I'm sorry, it's really boring, but it's important, right? And so how do you determine the value of something if it's making money, right? Well, you have to figure out how much does it actually make, and then you have to determine how much you're willing to pay for that. Because at the end of the day, when you're buying multifamily, you're not buying real estate. I don't give a crap about the real estate. The sticks in the mud don't matter to me. What matters is that stream of cash flow and how consistent can it continue moving, and how big can I make that stream of cash flow as I go. And so when we look at the NOI, we're really looking for the operating income minus the operating expenses to give you that NOI, right? Seems really easy until you get into the details. What is operating income? Well, operating income would be things you would be expected to receive month to month over and over and over again. Things that would not be operating income would be like one-time payments. So for example, on an apartment, we put in high-speed fiber lines, right? And AT&T, right, they wanted that because they knew once they put that in there, they could charge the tenants for that. Well, that's my property, right? You can't just come install lines without my permission. So they'd pay me for that. So I got a one-time payment for them coming and installing lines to then sell a new feature, a new amenity to my tenants. Well, that's great, I got that money one time, but I don't get to count that again. So if you're trying to buy my property, you shouldn't value the $5,000 I got last year for selling off my AT&T. Or if I sold off, I've done a couple times, the billboards, right? I made money on that billboard, but you're never gonna see money on that billboard, so that's not part of the operating income. Similarly is on expenses. And so expenses start to get really fun here because are you trying to not pay taxes or are you trying to make this thing worth as much as you possibly can, right? And so this is where we have to CPAs. I'm not one, I'm not a lawyer. Don't quote me, right? You saw me on the internet, but you talk to the CPAs about what equates to what, right? Because if I'm fixing something, is that a replacement or is that just a repair? And that starts to matter because if I have to make it an expense, right, then that's now starting to make that net operating income smaller, which I may want, right, if I'm trying to pay the least amount of taxes, but if I'm trying to get ready to sell this place, I want those expenses to be as little as possible. So when you get to things like, are you replacing appliances or an HVAC, are those expenses or are those, is that a CapEx event, right, something to be below the line? And so determining those things, right, you finally get to whatever you decide, hey, here's how I'm gonna run the property. It may not be the same as the owner that you're buying it from. The big one there being, right, so I'm buying a lakeside resort right now in Texas. The owners are owner-operators. They don't pay themselves a salary, right? And so their value is probably, has a number to it, but under their numbers, they don't assume that, right? So I'm gonna have to go hire at least 2 or 3 people to take over their owners. So I'm gonna have to increase my operating expenses from what they make to get to my NOI. But now I have my NOI, right? And so now I have this stream of cash that every year I should be making, and I get really excited. The problem is that's not take-home money, right? NOI does not mean that you have a mortgage in there. So if you're buying something with cash, right, you would be able to take your NOI with you, right, and that would be kind of the money that you're making. But if like most of us here, or me at least, you're gonna go use the bank's money because it's cheaper, you're gonna still have to pay a mortgage payment. So NOI doesn't include your mortgage payment. You have to subtract out mortgage payment and any kind of one-time expenses to get your net cash flow, right? Why is that important? Well, how much is the property worth? So pretty simple calculation here is the value is gonna be your NOI divided by your cap rate. You say, well, okay, what's this cap rate you speak of? Well, okay, we've got 3 different property types and they all have the same NOI, right? I've got my very crappy RV parks and mobile home parks. I've got a Class A building downtown, or you just have a Class B, C apartment complex. They all make the same amount of money. Which one do you want to own? Unless you're just a masochist, right? We all want to own the nicest thing we possibly can get, right? And you want to own the Class A downtown building because you know it's going to be there forever. You know the rents are going to keep going up. Like, absolutely, that's what I want to own. But, right, if all these things are paying out the same, shouldn't you pay the same? Well, no, because everybody wants to buy that one, right? So that's going to cause the value to go up on it and the value to go down on the $200,000 from the mobile home park, right? So now we're playing a little arbitrage game of what industries, or not really what industries, but what property types are getting what kind of cap rates. And so if you start putting cap rates on these things, now you can start to see how they all make the same amount of money inflow, right? That's the cash, but I'm going to pay different values based on how nice it is or where it's located. So California, right, I was talking to Chris, right, he's out in LA, right? You can buy stuff in LA for 2 and 3 caps, right? Down here in lower Alabama, you can buy stuff for 8 and 9 caps, right? So pick your poison wherever you go there. So at the end of the day, right, there's not a lot of difference when it comes to running a property, if it's a multifamily or a commercial deal versus a house. What's really different is the number of zeros and who you're talking to at the bank, right? You're gonna talk typically to a commercial lender versus a residential lender. So it's really this, right? It's just some brass balls. That may be inappropriate, but I'm in the Navy, so I'm sorry. So let's talk about a deal, right? So this is my clip art version here to walk through what I think is a pretty basic kind of syndication deal here. So you want to buy this $4 million apartment complex, and you think that the future value of this thing is worth $5 million, right? You know you can fix stuff, you know you can increase the value, you know the rents are under rented. A lot of times you'll find like people are living for free, right? They've got a bad deal or a good deal with the landlord. And so we want to structure a deal to be able to buy this, but you don't have $4 million. So you're going to go to the bank and you're going to get a 75% loan at $3 million, which means now you only need to bring $1 million cash, right? And that's great, but if you're me when I started out, right, I didn't have $1 million cash to go put into buy this deal. And so this is where the beauty of the syndication model kind of really begins. You need some things besides just cash though. Here's the important part, and this is where we can kind of make our money as real estate investors. Yes, you need the cash because you have to be able to close, but you're also going to be able to get that loan, you're going to have some requirements. And those requirements are going to be operational experience. And so has anybody ever bought like a house and you need like 2 years of rental experience before they're going to count the rents? Right? Same thing kind of applies. You got to have some experience to prove you know how to collect rents, you know how to pay bills. You have to have a net worth that is greater than the bank loan, the $3 million, and you have to have some liquidity post-closing. Each bank has a different requirement of what that is, but typically it looks like 6 months of your mortgage, your insurance, and your taxes that they can show after you close this deal, you're going to still have that amount of money sitting in an account that you can pull out, right, to be able to close right away. But I don't have any money, Jeremy. Great, it's time to partner, right? And so we have a couple different people that we're going to see in the syndication space. So we talk about these names, and you might hear them called different things. The first one we're going to call is sponsors. This is kind of who I am, right? We put the deal together. We're going to sign for the loan. We're going to do all the due diligence. We're going to raise the money. We're going to take over the asset management. We'll do all the investor relations. Our butt's on the line, right? That's how it works. But we also need investors, right? And the investors are trying to bring money. They want to make a return, and typically they don't want to do anything else, right? So they're going to be considered investors. And then you're going to have all your service providers. This is not a game that we do by ourselves, right? The first time you buy one of these deals, you cannot read a book and know all of the things that you're supposed to know, right, to be able to get through this. What you can do is hire an attorney, and they can keep telling you things every time at $275 an hour plus, right, of how this is supposed to work. So you can expect some big bills here, but these guys can keep you out of a lot of trouble other ways. And so you got all these people ready to go. You got the people that are going to bring you the money. You've got the good idea. You've got all the service providers. Now we got to put the deal together. And so we're going to call the property the Buy Property LLC. And there's got to be some valuation for you doing all the work as the sponsor, right? And so even if you're not necessarily bringing a lot of cash, you are bringing time, effort, experience, so on and so forth. There's some value to that. And typically what we see are some kind of splits in the ownership. And so the investors who are bringing the money, we call them limited partners. They're limited to only losing the amount of money that they put into the deal. But because of that, they don't get 100% valuation on their money towards the purchase, right? In this example, they're going to get 80%. And so for our deals, right, that we've done at Climb Capital, we've been from 20% GPs all the way up to 50% GPs. It really just depends on the deal. And for us, how we've done that is we've always started with what does the investor want to make and then work backwards, okay? And so if the investor wants to make a 20% IRR or an 18% IRR, let's figure out what it's going to take for them to get to that. Does the deal make sense? Is there a split that makes sense to make sure that we get there, right? Now, investor psychology is a funny thing. The first deal Bob and I ever put together, when we started working together in 2014, was a 74-unit mobile home park here in Pensacola. And we had taken a Rich Dad Poor Dad education event, right? We'd gone and we'd learned how to do a syndication from a lady who'd done, I don't know, half a dozen of them in her life. And we took all of her documents and we copied them all down, and we got back, we made all of our Excel spreadsheets look exactly like our Excel spreadsheets, right? And so we went and found this deal. We were like, oh man, this is a great way. We understood the NOI. On that deal specifically, it was a 10 cap at the time. They were paying $50,000 a year in water, right? And so we're like, okay, I think we can meter this and have the tenants pay for the water. So our plan on that deal was we're going to put in $30,000 of meters. The meter company would then charge the tenants each month for the water. And so we'd subtract $50,000 in expenses every year from the property. And in doing that, we'd increase that NOI by $50,000. And if I'm buying that at a 10 cap, you take $50,000 divided by 10%, I just added $500,000 in value to the property overnight, right? We were buying it for $800,000. We're like, boom, we have a great way to make a bunch of money. We have to do this deal, right? And so we put together a plan, and we went and said, hey, we're going to take our 20-80 split, right? We're going to do all the normal stuff that we just learned in this class, and we took it to our investors. And the returns that we were showing the investors were like 35 to 40%. And what did they say? too risky. It's impossible. There's no way I believe that, right? And we're like, no, I mean, we think it's real. Like we've done all the research. Like we feel very good about this. And so we were just beating our heads, and we called some people like, well, why don't you just change the splits? And so all we did is instead of giving them 80%, we gave them 60%, and the returns came down to 20. And some of those same guys that told me, no, this is way too risky, immediately said, yeah, I'm on board, right? 25%, I expect to make that, right? And so some investor psychology there, right? You really have to kind of make sure that what you're presenting is something they expect. Too high or too low can cause them to go, no, I'm not interested, right? And so you got to be careful how that looks like. But on this one here, right, so we're going to have an 80-20 split. The LPs get 80, GPs are going to take the 20. But the SEC still exists, right? And I don't want to kill you with legal details, but the truth is a lot of us have probably done deals that were not necessarily playing inside the rules of the SEC. Because if we have a deal in which we're bringing somebody else's money with the intention that they're going to give us the money, do no other work, and then make a return, that is considered a security, right? And if you have a security, you have to be licensed by the SEC. You have to have a broker-dealer's license. Anybody ever heard of this before? Right? Broker-dealers? A broker-dealer's license could take you millions of dollars and years of your life to be able to go actually get. This is what your Fidelities, your Schwabs, your Vanguards have, right? And so how we get around that is we actually have exemptions that the SEC allows so that we don't have to be broker-dealers to be able to provide securities or offer securities to investors. So the ones that you're going to hear most in this space are going to be the Reg D, 506B, and 506C. And what they do is they allow you to follow some specific parameters so that you can offer securities to limited partners or to investors without breaking the SEC's laws. And you do that by filing the exemption and following all the rules and doing all the things that require, which costs some money and takes some time, so that you don't go to jail later when you've broken the rules, right? And so there's a whole litany of information on this. You can go into hours and hours and days days of your life to read. But the big one here is you need a securities attorney to be able to walk you through this. And a securities attorney is not typically going to be your closing or your transaction attorney. It's likely not going to be somebody that you know, like from high school, that like he's an attorney who can help me with this. Yes, most of them are probably going to take a boilerplate from some download, and they're going to change the LLC name and give it back to you. But you still need somebody that understands what this stuff actually means, because this is a great way to go to jail if you screw it up, right? In the securities law, like a lot of real estate stuff at this kind of level, the only time that rules become black and white is when somebody gets sued, and then there's now a court case of so-and-so versus the US, right? And so if you don't want to have your name versus the US be a new bright line rule for real estate investors, go talk to the attorney and make sure you stay on the right side of the gray as you go. But that 506B, that 506C, right, it's going to allow you to go out there and find some investors. And this would be kind of a general expectation for a general partner structure. So of that 20%, a lot of times it's not just one person. A lot of times there's going to be a whole litany of people that are going to have a part and a piece of it. Here, for example, we got 3 sponsors and a KP, right? So the sponsors would be the guys who are actually putting the deal together. This would not be uncommon in some of my deals, right, where different people have different ownership percentages based on what they're bringing to the deal. Did they find the deal? Do they have relationships? Do they have the ability to operate the deal? Do they have the banking ability to close the loan? And then you also see on the right side here KPs, right? So often called KPs, these are key principals. These would be people that are willing and able to sign on your loan, right? And so by signing on the loan, they're typically using their liquidity and their net worth for you to be able to qualify for that $3 million loan if you don't have that qualification yourself, or whatever size it is. Why would somebody ever sign on your loan, right? Well, there's a couple reasons. If it's a KP on a deal that has recourse, right, a regular loan like we'd see for a house, then they may just get a higher interest return, may just get a higher return, they get part of the GP for that. If it's a large multifamily deal, you can get non-recourse loans, meaning there is debt on the property, but you have no debt on you personally. So as long as you don't lie, cheat, or steal, right, the bad boy clauses, the debt exists and you control the debt, but it's not on your personal balance sheet. And banks love non-recourse loans, and they really hate recourse loans, even though that's what they typically require. And so if you're a KP and you're able to work with a group that's getting a non-recourse loan, you can basically get some value from using your balance sheet and your liquidity without having to do any work. And there's literally kind of a cottage industry of people who have a bunch of money but don't do anything other than just kind of sign on loans that have no recourse to them, right? And so I highly recommend that we all get to there at some point in the future. But the question really is who's responsible for what, right? And there's lots of parts and pieces in there. Understanding that's a whole other day discussion. And there's not necessarily a right answer, there's just lots of different ones. So now we got the deal. We've got the 75% from the bank, we've got the $1 million from our Buy Property LLC, we've got the successful deal. You get your $5 million sales price. Hooray, you executed your business plan. What happens now? Well, we have to pay the loan back to the bank. Let's assume there's interest only or there's nothing paid down. So we got to pay the $3 million back to the bank. We have to pay $1 million back to the capital partners, the investors. They gave us $1 million. We have to give their money back first, right? After that, though, we now have $1 million. So how's that money then split? Well, your sponsors have no capital, but they had $200,000 gain. So it's that infinite return that everybody wants to have. Some dude's joking around in your truck out there, buddy. Investors get their $1 million in return capital, but they also get an $800,000 gain, right? And so they should be relatively happy. They just made an 80% ROI, which if they're comparing that to typically other things they would do that have hands-off investment, it's typically a great deal for them. One side's got the hard work and takes all the risk. The other side basically has to pray that they found the good sponsor and the good deal, but working together, it can be pretty sweet. They're passive and they're limited, right? That's it. So that's the big picture. I want to give you just kind of a little walkthrough of one deal that I've done recently that we closed on. So just for everybody likes numbers and examples, I don't have a picture of it here, I guess. We've gone full cycle now on 4 or 5 deals, but one of the last ones we did is we closed last December on a 42-unit apartment complex up in Citronelle, Alabama, which if anybody knows where Citronelle is, you have really good geography skills or you're from lower Alabama, but it's a nothing town in North Mobile County, only about an hour and a half from here. We bought that deal out of almost foreclosure for $700,000 in 2017. And all of our underwriting said, as long as this place stays half full, we're gonna make money, right? That was a lie. We bought the deal and we found that the work needed was significantly more than we had originally planned for. So we bought it for $700,000, we'd raised $200,000 to do the renovations, so we're in it for $900,000. I had some partners on the deal as part of the GP. The GP was not well defined. They were supposed to take care of it. A year later, it was not taken care of, it became my problem. And so for the next 2 years, I had to go find a way to keep this deal alive with no money, right? And so that ended up with me writing a lot of checks out of my own personal account to keep the deal alive, to get these units back up and renovated. But over time, right, I got these units back up and renovated, and we were able to sell the deal last December for $1.85 million. Our investors were in the deal for 3.5 years, made 116%, right? And me, as the GP, right, I think my return, I think I put $25,000 in on it. I think my return was something like 400 or 500%, right? Which was pretty good. But that was a deal that went bad. Like that's the kicker, right? Like I did everything wrong in that deal setting it up and it still made a ton of money. Now we can say, yeah, the cap rates have continued to go down in the space, but it just kind of goes to show if you're willing to stick it out long enough and you're willing to just keep doing the little things to fix the problems, your valuation is determined by your building, not everything else going around. And so on that property, right, if you're renting out now $600, $800 a month rents, there ain't a lot out there, right? And so if you can provide that service, provide that product, and just hang on long enough, you can make some money. So that's all I have the slides for, but I would guess there's probably a question or two, or I'll just go sit down in the back and go watch.
Yeah, so we've looked at properties like this, decent amount of like different types, but one of the things that always seems to be the most challenging is determining what like a real estate cap rate actually is.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with like less organized sellers than what the expectation should be. Do you have any like tips or?
So the question is really, how do you determine the cap rate, especially with less organized sellers? I would tell you even organized sellers, it's a real problem right now. For the last 3 or 4 years, if you've looked at multifamily deals, they typically have not had a price on the offering, right? It says, market price or whatever. Now you call the broker and you say, hey buddy, what's the price? He'll be like, well, the whisper price is, he'll tell you exactly what he's expecting, but they don't put it on anything. The reason being there's been kind of an overestimation of value a lot of times. But the question really for that one becomes, what do you need to make on the cost of your own money to make it worth your time? And so determining the cap rate is only important in the fact that you want to know what your other options would be for that same amount of money it's making, but you really have to determine the value from your side. So if your investors are expecting an 18% return, work backwards, right, to determine what that's going to mean you have to buy it for you to still make money with the financing that you have in it with their money and you still getting something to write home to mom about, right? About me, I've never bought a single family rental. I've never flipped a house. I wholesaled, but I wholesaled the name only because I wrote the checks and I had the other guy do all the work. He was great till he stole my money. I've only done the syndication model, right? The good news with that is I have the opportunity to make really big returns over time. The bad news with that is you don't make a lot of money up front, right? Because on these deals, right, when you're trying to determine this cap rate, you're trying to determine how much is this worth for me to do, and you're projecting that off into the future, 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now. And so, yeah, I'm gonna have a big payday when this property sells, but while I'm actually owning this property, there may be some fees that I'm pulling off of it, and maybe I'm getting a little bit of the cash flow, but typically there's gonna be some kind of pref where your investors are gonna expect that you're not gonna take anything as the GP until they get paid a minimum percentage, right? And so, in that respect, it really comes down to, hey, what are you willing to get into this property for? And what are you willing to accept as kind of your minimum return for your effort and your time? So I know that's a really crappy answer.
No, that's I actually like that answer because I've honestly looked at it, you know, you're saying it as opposed to like what my money's worth to me, which is much more.
Right. So if you're a Chinese national and you're afraid that your government's going to steal your money, you'll accept a 0% return on your money because you just don't want your money to go away, right? And those guys show up in Dallas sometimes and they go buy 300 unit properties, and none of us in here are going to ever be competitive against 0% money, right? Or maybe you're a billionaire and you're really just worried about, you know, keeping your assets kind of moving, your money moving. You don't care about return as much as you just care about it not losing value. Same thing. It's going to be tough to beat them. And so that's where you have to kind of find the projects and the properties and locations where you're not competing against people with stupid cheap money that you can't compete against on this model.
For sure. I think that's the challenge. I think a lot of us are in like that wealth accumulation mode.
Yeah.
So we're all like, want max everything all the time.
Right. And if you want to max everything all the time, you can't buy the nicest thing on the block, right? Like we all want to go buy 200 units in like an A-class neighborhood, which, yeah, great, I love it. But if you have no money, you're never going to make any money with that, right? Like that's the kicker. Talking about cap rates too, I think this is important. What influences cap rates would be, I think, the other question that you're probably asking without realizing is it is the money, right? It's people looking for a return on their own capital, right? And so if you think about over the last 10 years, going all the way back to like 2009, 2010, which was kind of the bottom of the real estate market for multifamily, cap rates have continued to go down, right? And they've gone down for a lot of reasons. One is people are looking for something to put their money into that's hard, that they can touch, that they know isn't going anywhere, that's not being controlled by people they don't know, who don't care about them, who are making decisions not in their favor in New York City, right? So there's a lot of people that just want to get out of the stock market or get out of whatever else they're in to go touch and buy physical real estate. So there's been money rushing into that, right? On top of that, the United States has printed so much money in the last couple of years. Where's that money going to go, right? If I gave you $1 billion after you bought your cool car and paid off all your debt, what are you going to do with it? You're probably going to buy stocks, you're going to buy real estate. That's the exact same thing that the $1 trillion that we've printed in the last year has been doing. And so as there's been more and more money running to try to chase returns. The stock market, right? If you talk to a lot of people about the stock market, they'll tell you, hey, they had 12, 13, 40% return projections in the past. Now these financial advisors are telling these people expect 6 to 8% returns. Well, going forward, they don't like that idea. They need more money. They didn't save enough money. They're always trying to chase the returns. And so they're looking for other asset classes that can pay a higher return than the 6 to 8 that they think they can get from that, right? So a lot of money's moved from the stock market, from equities, into alternative investments, AKA real estate, right? And so as we've seen that, we've seen the cap rates continue to be compressed because as more and more money comes into the market, people are willing to accept a lower and lower and lower return at the end of the day. Really at cap rate, what you can consider that is if you bought this property in all cash, that would be your percentage return, right? So if you bought $1 million property at a 10% cap rate, right? You could say, hey, and you bought it in all cash, I'm gonna make 10% on this property this year, right? And so as that cap rate gets smaller and smaller, then it becomes a problem. The other thing you can talk about with cap rates is from the other side, which is most people are gonna go ahead and lever these properties, they're gonna get a loan. And so you need a spread between the cost of your loan capital and whatever your cap rate is. And so as we've seen the interest rates continue to dive, cap rates have been able to follow because if I can get a 3% loan on a huge multifamily non-recourse, I'm glad to pay a 5% cap rate, right? I'm still making a 2% spread, and if you go through all the numbers, a 2% spread over your loan, you're typically gonna be able to make money on that over time. So as interest rates continue to stay low and at some point maybe go back up, the question is what happens to cap rates? Is there still enough pressure from the top to keep those cap rates low, or are those cap rates gonna have to start coming back up? So the last answer to a question you didn't really ask is projecting cap rates. If you're looking at a deal either as a sponsor or as a limited partner, the value in this property is going to be very, very reliant on how much you sell this for in the future. And your guesstimate of the future is going to be probably the biggest portion of your return. So if you're assuming that the lowest cap rates we've ever seen with the lowest interest rates we've ever seen are going to continue to go low over the next 5 to 10 years, good on you. I'll buy it when you foreclose on it, right? But if you have any kind of semblance of normalcy, you're expecting that's going to be a leveling off, or that's going to be an increasing, you're having to underwrite some kind of increasing cap rate, meaning your property is going to have to make even more money because now that cap rate, right, is going to be bigger, so the value is going to be even smaller. So if you change nothing, if you bought a building today, made $100,000 in NOI, and your cap rate went up, your value of your property just went down, right? Just because the cap rate moved. And so expecting that you're going to have to over-earn for potential cap rate raise to still make money on these deals also makes it a lot more difficult to kind of understand what the future is and what you want to buy. So, these deals, these syndication deals, everybody likes to say value add, right? That's the going du jour term, right? Oh, I got a value add deal. No, it's not. But you have to have some kind of value add component because you're going to have to be able to create and force value if you're going to want to be able to kind of see anything on the backside if the cap rates make any adjustments. Yeah.
My group syndicates a lot, and we had a conversation this week about not only how many more people are syndicating lately, but just some of the outcomes that we're seeing, the quality or maybe lack thereof. Do you have an opinion on it since you've been doing it a while?
Yeah, so I probably, first off, I am the problem, I would say, right? So I'm just a few years ahead. I would say that syndication, when I first learned about it, there was maybe one book that you could read about it. There was no YouTube series, right? There was maybe a handful of rather expensive classes you could go to, even back in 14, 15, even 16. Today, everybody and their mother who's ever syndicated one deal that has 12 units has a YouTube brand telling everybody how they're going to be super rich and famous from following their one method, right? There is some stupid money chasing some stupid deals. And I think you can be frustrated by that, or you can just try to find the angle and find your own kind of tangential idea of how you can make money off of that. I can tell you that the group that I sold my first deal to, they couldn't raise enough money to be able to close on that deal. So they called me when they're under contract and said, hey, can you help us raise money for the deal we're buying from you? Like, the SEC gets a say in this, and the answer is no, I can't help you, right? But what I could do, right, is I introduced them to some other guys, right? So I found some other guys to join their GP so they could raise the money. They raised the money, they closed the deal, they had it for all of 3 months, right? I said, hey guys, I have another deal if you want to buy it. There's only 40 units. Like, oh, that's too small for us now. We're only targeting 150 plus unit buildings. This is the group 4 months ago couldn't raise enough money to buy the 142 unit, right? I'm not mad at those guys, but everybody thinks that they're going to go buy a 200 unit building. Good on you, right? You might be able to pull it off. I'm not saying you can't close on it. I do question in 10 years you're going to make any money on it. So I think as more and more people are running to it, we're going to see the pricing is just going to get tighter and tighter, and you're going to have to find something that kind of is your niche to kind of focus on. For me specifically, I've had a couple people ask me this morning, how do I find deals? I love you guys for doing all the marketing and stuff. I've not done any marketing in the last 5 years. Everything that I've bought has been off a relationship from a broker who's trying to sell a deal quickly and that's already they know is a pain, right? For example, on Friday I got a phone call from a broker that we're working with. He's like, hey Jeremy, I got the seller. He wants to sell this mobile home park. It's trash. He wants no money for it. There are no financials. We know you buy things with no financials, right? And like, yeah, I'll buy it. And then I went and looked at it. It was all RVs, so I didn't want to buy it, right? But it's those kind of relationships where guys know that, hey, I'm the guy you call if your seller has no financials. That's how I'm able to kind of get deals where other people can't. So don't steal that one. You guys go find your own niche. But I can't tell you, if you buy something with no financials, you bring financials, even if they're shit, you can still make a couple $100,000 because at least the next guy knows how bad it is when he's buying it. So that's kind of my game. There you go. What else?
You said that there's very little money up front. Do you structure in acquisition fees and things like that into your deals?
So our typical structure, listen, everything's deal dependent, so it's a little tough. But kind of our typical syndication structure, if I'm sending it to my investor list and I'm kind of going to blow it up and kind of make it a big deal, is we're going to look for a 2% acquisition fee and a 2% asset management fee, which seems to be relatively standard in the industry. You'll see those numbers, the percentages fluctuate by a percentage or so. And then we're typically going to do kind of a 20 to 35% GP split, with then the rest going to the LPs. I've had LPs get very frustrated by that, right? But I think you have to realize that I'm looking at hundreds, if not thousands of deals now to be able to find one deal. And so my acquisition fee is really what pays for me to have my acquisitions team, right? I've got a handful of people that work for me now. And that's really kind of what their salary is based off. So if Jeremy buys no deals next year, the team gets fired. So we got to keep buying deals. But on top of that, the asset management fee is really important. And a lot of people want to knock that off, or like, hey, I'm not going to do an asset management fee. That it's too tight. If your deal can't support an asset management fee, you probably don't have a deal. And here's the reason why. If you're an LP, you want your sponsor to be motivated to manage your deal, right? Right now, I know of a handful of deals that are not doing very well. Guys are blowing their names up on the internet. All of a sudden, things aren't working well for them, right? They're getting too thin of deals, and things change a little bit. COVID happens; they can't survive. And one of those things that happens is that they never underwrote an asset management fee, or they didn't take enough of a split, so they're not motivated to manage the deal anymore, right? When the deal starts getting bad, they're just like, okay, I'll walk away from it. It's a non-recourse loan. It sucks, but we'll move on to the next one, right? If you have that asset management fee, at the very least, if you have to fire that operator, right? You have to fire the GP, which is one of the only things the LPs kind of have the ability to do is they can fire the GP. You need to have some source of funds to pay a fill-in GP kind of take their spot, right? You're typically not going to be able to take their ownership, but if you at least have an asset management fee, there's some funds there to pay somebody to kind of make sure this thing is managed. But those are the two fees that we do. Other fees you're going to see would be a disposition fee, so on sale, I've seen a 1% fee before. And the big one that I think is kind of silly, but I see it all the time right now, is a refinance fee. A refinance for these things can take years off of your life dealing with some of these banks. So I've seen up to 1.5% or 2%. Our model has always been trying to be as clear as possible. We talked about investors. A confused mind says no. And so when you get an institutional money, you'll start getting waterfalls. Familiar with waterfalls? So as you hit certain hurdles, it'll change your splits. Try to describe that to a well-to-do older lady. Gets really confusing really fast, and they just say no. Where if you say, hey, it's a simple split. I make my money after you make your money. Much easier for them to say yes.
Do you guys have a Pref that you typically target?
Yes, the question is Pref. Yes, and that Pref has continued to move down. So we are now typically at a 7% Pref. We were at 8% until this year, and now we've moved it down to a 7. That's kind of been the industry standard. And then I've seen a lot of bigger operators moving that down to a 6. Yeah, a preferred return. So what's a Pref? So the idea with a Pref is that your investor that gives you the money wants to ensure that they're first in line to get their money back, right? And so if they have a set preferred return, they're going to receive that preferred return before the split starts. So it's a 80-20 split, but it's not going to start splitting until after the investor gets their first 7 or 8%, right? And so there's $100,000 that's coming out of the deal. They raised, let's say $1 million, right? And so they need to get an $80,000 Pref to the investors, and then that last $20,000 actually gets split 20-80, which goes back to the question the first time, which is how do you determine cap rates? You've got to kind of anticipate what your cash flows are going to be to figure out when you're ever going to get paid, right? I would argue all of you in here have probably made more money than me in the last 3 or 4 years if you've been doing this, because all of my deals, the back-end money is really great, but the upfront money sucks, right? The difference is, though, I'm willing to take the kind of the long-term view to kind of continue building bigger and bigger deals so that in 3 or 4 years, right, my deal size is $100 million, not $3 million, right? But I can't focus my time on both, right? So it was just a decision. I don't think either side's right or wrong. It's just different.
And these Prefs are paid out monthly, quarterly, something?
So it's dependent on the deal. We say quarterly, we'll make our decisions on Prefs, and there's no guarantee of payment, right? So that's the other thing, right? You get, hey, is it guaranteed? Nothing's guaranteed, right? That's a terrible word in investor world. But we typically look, hey, quarterly, have we hit the numbers we're trying to project? If we can, we'll pay the Pref. And then our Prefs typically have a catch-up provision. So let's say year 1, we know we're not going to have enough cash flow. We're doing big construction. It's unlikely we're going to have anything to pay out. That Pref then rolls to the year 2. So I owed you $100,000 in year 1. I only paid you 20. Well, that other 80 has to follow year 2. And I have to pay you 80 plus the 100 again before the splits start. So on a couple of my deals, right, I've never seen any cash flow as the GP because the Prefs kept rolling until we sold the deal. I could pay all the Prefs at sale, and then I got my cut on top of that.
My next question would be, so the Prefs are paid out, but then at the time of sale, right, the exit, 20, 80, the investors are in that 80, but do the investors own a percentage of their 80 depending on how much money they're putting into the deal?
Yeah, so the question is kind of how do the investors own their 80%? So if you have 100% of the money raised and you give me 10% of the total money raised, right, that's great, but that's only your 10% of the what we'd call Class A, and then your total ownership would be multiplied by 0.8, right? So you'd be actually at 8% total ownership, even though you were 10% of the total raise.
Do you have a CRM reference for your investors?
I do. I use IMS, Investor Management Service, or Investor Management Software. It's a real page product. It's not cheap. It's like $12,000, $15,000 a year, but yeah. There's a few out there that I've used also that were terrible that are much cheaper. So I use groundbreaker.co. They fired all of their backend support while I was using them and still charged me all the money, and somehow I wasn't sure how that worked, but I hear they're better now. So they're kind of a dime a dozen now. The downside is that most of them are really kind of, they're not forward looking to find investors. They're always kind of once you have those investors. So going to find your investors is still kind of on you. There's no product or service that I found that really kind of helps in one place to kind of do all those things. If you find it, let me know. I'll pay for it.
Build it.
Yeah, build it.
I got one more for you. So when you exit on these, have you ever exited to like a refinance to keep like your own portfolio?
So yeah, so the question is when you exit, can you exit to a refinance? Some deals we actually, as part of our business plan a refinance at some point, year 2 or 3, because there's some kind of construction component. And then some we can get to the end and choose to refinance instead of sale. That decision is going to come down again to the LPs. They get a vote on that. They basically decide, hey, can you sell or do you refinance, and do I stay or do I go as the operator?
And how does that affect like the LP's return at the end of the day? So I guess they vote on it. Do you basically give them like options?
Well, so typically it's pretty heavy-handed when you get that securities document. The documents that securities lawyer gives you a PPM, gives you an operating agreement, gives you a subscription agreement, typically an investor questionnaire. You want to make sure that you're in control of those, because once the investor signs those, they're basically giving you illiquid money that they can't get back until you say they can have it back. And so those determinations are made through that PPM and OM. You can choose, hey, if I refinance at some point, I give you all of your money back plus a return, you don't have ownership anymore. You just have to disclose that, of course. Or what we typically do, they have ownership in perpetuity. And so even if we refinance, they have all their money back. They still have their ownership, but we can continue operating the deal if we want it.
So I guess in that case, do they keep it for return?
The pref only follows the capital that's in the deal. So if I paid you back all of your capital, then there is no pref. Capital is not the same there's an investment return versus capital, right? So a refinance, if a bank gives you more money when you relever, that would be capital you can give back. That's capital return. If you have money from the original raise that you didn't spend, you give back, that's a capital return. If you're making money month to month through your operations, right, that's an investment return. And so you got to be careful, because there's a lot of operators who play both sides incorrectly, right? And they'll pay you back, an investment return as a capital return to try to decrease that pref, or worse, they're paying you off your own capital, calling it an investment return even though you're not making any money. Most people don't understand that, and I love my investors, but I had a guy that I think he invested with me 3 times before we found out that he got his money back before we started talking about the return percentage. And so the deal specifically that we were taking at the time was 103% total return. And he called me and he was talking to me about it. I was like, wait, you do realize you get all of your money back and then we get 103%. He goes, oh, that's way better than I thought, right? This is a dude that, I take it back. Yeah, I was like, if you're cool with the 3% return, we can work that out, man. Like, that's not a problem. So that goes back to the sophistication of your investors, right? If you have friends and family, like a lot of our investors started off from the real estate club here. They're pilots, Navy guys, plus or minus probably 10 years of my age, right? That's only slowly started to expand over the last year or so. Whatever they're looking for, kind of what their knowledge is, your ability to educate them is probably as important, if not more important, than anything else, because if they don't understand, they're just going to say no.
So that sparks one more.
I love it.
Keep going after. So that brings up an interesting question. So say if that guy's going up to 3%, so do you offer the same returns to all your limited partners, or is that like an individual conversation?
So it all have to be disclosed, right? So everything has to be disclosed. In the past, it's been very, very normal that all the money would come in at the same levels. Recently, we have not done it yet, but I've seen quite a few other people I know now having different levels of capital contribution, and the different levels of contribution having different return profiles. So, hey, I can give you a guaranteed, or I give you a 10% return, but there's no equity upside, right? But you get a 10% pref, and then a B share would be, you don't get a pref, but you get all the equity upside, right? Or if you give me over $500,000, you get a higher return than if you give me $250,000 and if you give me $100,000, right? So just kind of different staggers. Again, goes back to the level of your investor sophistication for them to be able to be able and willing to accept that kind of as a possibility as you go.
I've heard the term compressed cap rate kind of just going around. Can you elaborate on that or just explain?
So compressed cap rate. So when we go back to the question, well, I'm not even trying to go back through all my slides, but we go back to the question of those 3 different types of deals, right? You've got the apartment complex. Oh, there it is. You got the apartment complex, the RV or mobile home park, and the office building. They all have that NOI. They all have a cap rate. Compression of cap rates is really just the discussion that, let's say 5 years ago, I could buy a mobile home park at a 10 cap, right? So if it's a $200,000 property, divide that by 10%, I'm going to pay $2 million. Nowadays, maybe that's all the way gone down. This hasn't gone this low, but let's say it's gone all the way down to a 5 cap, right? So it compressed from a 10 to a 5. That property's value now went from $2 million to $4 million, right? So as the cap rates compress, the values are going up with the same amount of money being made from that property. And so really what that means is just people are willing to accept a lower return and they're compressing the cap rates, as I was saying that. One other thing with cap rates only matter when you're buying an on-market deal that's running effectively, right? So I bought lots of deals that aren't making any money. There's a negative NOI, right? When I actually look at the financials, or are there no financials? So if I'm buying that deal, I'm not buying it like a negative cap rate, right? There is no cap rate. So don't put all your eggs in the basket of I gotta buy a great cap rate. Buy a deal that you know you can make money and then have a projection based on selling it at some point in the future on a more normalized cap rate. I don't think I've bought anything that had a cap rate that was worth talking about in the last 2 years. And then be careful too, because the other thing you'll see with cap rates right now, if you're looking at these deals, is the broker will try to sell you, this is a year 2 stabilized 6 cap, right? Which means you're gonna buy it at some crappy like 0 cap, you're gonna do all the work and hope and pray in year 2, you might actually have a 6 cap when you get done with it. If you're willing to do that, fine, great, but I'm not. So I saw one yesterday, I think they were projecting a year 3 cap rate. Like they told you you're gonna make no money in 3 years, but damn it, if you work hard and spend all of your money, you might too have a 6% cap rate at the end of year 3, right?
I've seen that in our market.
Yeah.
They were trying to sell a property, a commercial deal like this, but like on a pro forma.
Yeah.
This is what it can do. in
Every
5 years.
every deal from a broker is going to have a pro forma. Recognize that those pro formas are literally 22-year-old kids who are working 80 hours a week, guesstimating at best, and just throwing stuff out there. I hired one of those people, right, from JLL. She now works for me. And so her favorite thing to do is go read these pro formas and then call these brokers and just give them hell about how stupid they are. Like, tell me exactly how you came up with that idea, and can you project that? Can you show me how that's ever going to happen, right? And they have no idea. Like, they're praying for the bigger fool. And so the on-market deals, I tell you, be careful, right? If you're trying to go find deals on LoopNet, even on CoStar, if Crexy, right? I'm not saying there's not deals there. I've bought great deals off of those websites, but most of the time if I'm selling a deal, my first projection is I'm gonna go to a broker right now and say, can you find me a buyer for this deal at the price point I want? Because if I can just find that one guy and I don't have to deal with all the other trash, he'll just buy it and go, we're all happy, right? If I can't find that, then he'll start shopping it to his off-market buyers, right? Like, hey, I got an off-market deal. Recognize you're never getting the only off-market deal, right? Like, there's 15 or 20 dudes that are seeing it. So the second you start telling it to the broker, it's no longer, quote, off market, but he's gonna tell you it is. If at the point it gets to an auction site or a LoopNet, that broker is literally at his last month of being able to try to sell this thing, and he's doing whatever he can to get it out there. As an owner, I absolutely have no desire for my properties to go that far. If they're on the market for more than a couple months, I now know that nobody's gonna buy it, right? I'm gonna pull that thing off just because I don't want it. I know that they're just gonna beat me up on price, right? Anytime I get an offer. So I got one right now. I got a 12 unit in Mobile that's been on the market since April on Crexy. I've had 3 different buyer groups fall out after getting under contract. All their fault, none of my faults. They just couldn't complete. One had a 1031 with a mom that wasn't capable of signing or something. I mean, just crazy stories, right? And I told the broker this week, I was like, thou shalt have me a contract in hand by the end of the week, or you lose the listing. I'm not gonna keep this thing out there because it's not gaining any value. Even though I'm making more money every month, it's not making any more value to me to sell it because everybody else sees it as this dog that's been on the market too long. So
if I wanted to I want to start buying larger assets starting on Monday. What are the first 3 things I should do?
So great question. The question is, if I want to start buying larger assets tomorrow or Monday, what do I do? I started at the beginning, right? There's a lot of different parts and pieces to this deal. You don't need to be the only guy sitting over on the right side, right? You can find other people. This GP, it's got a lot of people that got to do something. You probably have a skill set that can enhance somebody else's GP and would allow you to be a part of the process. Your ability to go buy a 200 unit deal tomorrow, I'm not saying you can't do it. The likelihood of you being taken seriously is pretty small. But if you can go find another GP group or partner with another GP group because you have the deal or you have the investors, or you have the operational experience, or you have something else they need, right? That's going to be the way that most people are getting into this. You guys are all on the social medias probably as much as I am. You've seen these people that you're like, who are you? And all of a sudden they're buying this 400 unit deal. You recognize that they're one of like 20 GPs. Their slice is this small. They make no control decisions, but damn it, they get to say they're part of the GP, right? And that's really the way to get started, whether we like it or not, because they're at least getting that foot in the door, getting their name on the loan, so on and so forth. One thing to talk about is primary loan source for these deals, for these multifamily deals, is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They require the property to be over typically $1 million loan size, 90 days of more than 90% stabilized occupancy and collections, and you can typically then qualify for a non-recourse loan, right? To qualify for the non-recourse loan, you need that on the property. You as the person, of course, still need the net worth and liquidity. You also need Fannie, Freddie, or otherwise operational experience. So a lot of people, if you're trying to get into this, go find a way where you can go sign on a loan with somebody else. The second you sign on the loan, you now have the experience to go do it yourself the next month, right? So if you can go be that KP or sign on a deal, especially if it's non-recourse, and there's really nothing can ever come back on you, assuming nobody else is lying, cheating, or stealing, it's a pretty good way to kind of jump in very quickly and have some value for other groups as you go. Or if you can just find me a deal, I can bring you everything else. I'll gladly partner with you.
That works too.
Yeah, that works pretty well too, right? I'll tell you the thing that, so we didn't talk about it much, but there are two types of raises, right? There's a 506C and there's a 506B, the two exemptions. The 506B allows you to take money from both accredited and non-accredited investors, okay? Does anybody know what an accredited investor is? So more than $1 million net worth, makes more than $200,000 or makes more than $200,000 and will expected to do so continually, right? And has to typically be kind of certified by a CPA. That $1 million net worth can't include their personal home either, right? But if you get accredited investors and all of your investors are accredited, life gets a lot easier. The SEC and the US government thinks that they're smart enough and rich enough that you don't have to tell them as much, right? If you have non-accredited investors, often called sophisticated investors, right? They have to show and prove to you through that investor questionnaire that they have enough foresight and knowledge to be able to take this risk. And you have to know enough about their personal financial situation to believe they can take the risk. They can join that group, right? So a 506B allows you to take 35 non-accredited investors and as many accredited investors as you want, raise as much money as you want, right? Some higher level of disclosures required, but you cannot generally solicit. No advertisements, can't talk about it on the internet, can't go find somebody tomorrow and get them on your deal the next day, right? You have to have a pre-existing substantial business relationship, right? That makes it a lot harder to raise money through that method, right? The other side would be the 506C. The 506C would be only accredited investors, but it does allow you to generally solicit if you choose to do so. It changes some of your paperwork, but that's only accredited investors, but then you can kind of put it out there to the world. So a lot of times money raisers, right, guys can kind of go find a group of people that they know well. They can come and basically bring that group of money by being part of the GP, and then that connection allows the GP to have that prior existing relationship with that group of money, and that's how people can kind of jump on kind of a basic. Go in the back first.
How often do you think you see social media posts asking for money?
Incorrectly?
Yeah.
I would say at least 3 times a day. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, listen, like, is the SEC out to get us? No. The only people that ever get in trouble is when the deals go bad and somebody sues, right? And so the lawsuits aren't super rampant when everybody's making money. But if you've bought anything in the last 10 years, you've looked like a genius because the cap rate compressed, right? The cap rate compressed and they made no more money, you tripled in value, right? And so everybody's looking like a king. So at some point, the tide goes out, we see who's not wearing any shorts in the ocean, and we're gonna see a lot of lawsuits, and I think we're gonna have a lot of people's social media posts come back to haunt them. We've already started seeing some. Grant Cardone, everybody knows Grant, his funds got sued last year. It was a totally frivolous lawsuit, but they were literally just taking pictures of his Instagram, his Snapchats, his Facebook posts and saying, he was saying this, he was promising that, he was breaking all the rules, right? And so absolutely all the time. And you gotta be careful, right? And it doesn't matter that you're buying a big deal or if you're buying a small deal, right? Even if you guys are buying a single family home and somebody's just giving you money without kind of any intention of it being a loan, but just giving you an investment, that would really include a security, right? Now, are you gonna get caught? Probably not, but if it goes bad, you can go to jail or owe them lots of money, right? So, it's not criminal, but it's civil.
So these, the 506B funds, 506C funds, what does that process typically look like to start it?
So the question is, so how long does it take, right? So typically on a deal for us, we're looking at a 60-day timeline if everything's kind of looking really well from when you find the deal from when you need to close. So you usually have to kind of use some of your other processes there under negotiating the LOI and then getting the PSA negotiation to give you a couple more weeks. But you say, okay, I got the deal, I'm ready to go. To be able to start the securities documents, you need to have kind of a full understanding of your business plan. And so that typically takes 2 or 3 weeks as you kind of get into the deal. And so at that point, we engage with the securities attorney, their ability to turn that around. The paperwork is typically a week or so. And then you have your amount of time until you need to raise all the money and then close. So the actual securities document process doesn't take a ton of time. It's pretty boilerplate, meaning that they're just copying and pasting the last one. Most securities attorney firms, quite honestly, that you see on the internet, they are like puppy mills. They just make the same document over and over again. You pay them $15,000, they do all the work for you. It looks exactly like the last guy. There's very little variation. How do I know? Because the last time I used one of them, the guy sent me an LLC that had somebody else's name on it, and he had forgotten to change the LLC on the control find, right? That's fine. I'm not mad about him, but that's just kind of the nature of the beast. So it doesn't necessarily take a lot of time. The problem is when you have some significant deviations from like the normal, that takes more time for them to go make sure all that stuff's in there. And then the PPM, the private placement memorandum, that's a document that basically shows the investor all the things that could go wrong. You typically want to make sure you understand all the things that you think you could screw up, and you want to make sure those are in there. And so like nowadays, COVID would be a big one. We all want to make sure if there's another pandemic, hey, if a pandemic happens, you might lose all your money, right? Like make sure all those things are kind of disclosed so there's no surprises. But the process itself, let's say 2 weeks on average, takes you 12 grand. The other thing you got to think about is on the backside is every state has an SEC equivalent, right? They're called blue sky laws. And so when you take investors from each state, you typically have to also register your security in each state through that securities attorney. So they might charge you $12.5 for the basic documents, but then they're going to charge you actual cost for filing each state. Be very careful about New Jersey and New York because they charge huge filing fees. If it's only one small investor, right? One small investor that gives you 10 grand, then you have to go spend 3 grand to go get a file. Well, that was kind of not even worth taking his money, right? And it's typically not that much. It's usually a couple $100. And if there's multiple people in the states, usually only one filing. But those have to be done within 14 days of that person investing the money. And that's one where if you don't do it right, you get lots of nasty letters from the states. And let me tell you how much fun it's talking to Nebraska about securities laws. I know. So one day off. All right, what else?
How do you manage your properties? Or if you have
So we started with third-party management. Everybody thinks that you're going to find your third-party manager, they're going to save your life, and then you fire them all. I think I fired them all in town now. And so I now self-manage, so we've hired our own management company in-house. If you're buying the 200, 150, 200 plus, third-party management is relatively easy. Those are properties that people want to manage. If you're buying the 30 to 80 units that may or may not actually be able to afford a full-time manager, it's pretty tough to find people that want to take care of that like you want to take care of it. And so my recommendation, if you want to get into this, is start finding that manager first, or how you're going to manage it, because they're going to be able to kind of help you figure out the process, including the purchase, like underwriting, walking the units, so on and so forth. They're almost like the first service provider I think you should kind of have in the bag before you start talking to anybody else. Does that answer the question?
Really rookie question. How do you get the property in the contract?
How do you get the property under contract? So the process that we typically use is an LOI. It's a letter of intent. A letter of intent is non-binding, but what it means is that you and the seller, or you and the buyer, depending what side you're on, are going to go back and forth to try to make sure that deal terms are understood before you start spending all the time at $300 or $400 an hour with your attorneys going back and forth on the contract. And so what we do is we'd send in an LOI to the broker, to the owner, saying, hey, here's the price, the terms, the EMD, due diligence timeline, things that we're requesting that you provide us. And then, hey, sign a date if you agree. They sign a date. We now have an LOI. The LOI typically, when signed, gives you like a 14-day exclusivity to be able to go get a purchase and sell contract that's officially like an actual contract from the attorney. And that'll take another couple days to typically go back and forth and figure that out. Things to look for in those, who's paying for title? You guys think, oh, title, not a big deal. Well, I'm looking on a deal right now, the title insurance is $33,000, right? Who pays for title starts to matter, it becomes material. And so when you start thinking about some of these things, that's when having that attorney who kind of knows the typical breakdown becomes important.
Then LOIs, like, are you, is there like a cutoff, like over 20 units you're doing LOIs, or are you doing them all the way down to like 6, 7, 8?
I mean, it's a good question. How sophisticated is your seller? I would typically say LOI is better, unless you just like have a relationship and you know just give them the contract, they'll sign it, you can go. Kind of like a wholesale idea, like always present the contract, so be it. But typically that LOI is important, so make sure that you don't waste time getting your attorney involved before the LOI is understood. And I'll tell you guys too, if you're gonna put an LOI out, as a guy that sold a lot of properties, your EMD matters, right? I can't tell you how many times I get somebody trying to buy a $3 million building from me, and they're trying to put down like $3,000 EMD. Bro, I'm not even taking you seriously at that point, right? Like show up with 1% or just go away, right? Like it's the little things that start making the seller question, is this person serious? So timelines are really important, security of closing, EMDs, and then is your money ever gonna go hard, and when it's gonna go hard, or why we go hard, are the things that really kind of help you stand out. Now, be careful not to go to the logical other side, where these guys that are doing syndications now are putting $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 hard money down day one on these deals to get them. But that's the kind of requirement some of these big cities where guys are doing 200 plus unit deals. Now I'll say though, if that deal is on market and it's got a Fannie Freddie loan on it, it's only been on there for 2 years, they've already done professional inspections, they have professional third-party management, you might be willing to do that because it's still gonna qualify, like you know it's there, right? But just be careful because right now we're in a lawsuit over EMDs that they went hard on us and then they tried to take their money back and we said no. It's weird, right?
Awkward.
When you said you were going to close and you didn't close and you were going to give me the money otherwise, I'm going to take your money, right? So me and Mobile Court get a talk on Monday. No big deal.
When you're raising capital, so like in that example, $1 million is what you know the limited partners are coming into the deal with. But are you also raising capital for renovations?
Yes.
Closing costs, things like that. Or?
Depends on your loan, right? So you're going to definitely have closing costs. You're definitely going to have some type of renovations or capex or some kind of holdback. You need some kind of reserve. I would expect on most deals, even at 75% leverage, you're going to raise about 35% of the cost of the deal. You're going to have to raise in capital. Is kind of what we've seen, and we sometimes think we can get that smaller, and then we always go right back to it. It just
Typically 35%.
35% is going to be pretty standard. And 75% leverage is pretty standard. Some guys can get 80 and they'll fight their life to get 80. The banks are just kind of tightening up right now. Yeah. That's it. I have no secrets. You guys have my information there at the end. Go climbcapital.com, send me an email. I'm probably dumber than everybody here, so if I can do it, you can probably do it better. I'm kidding, Tyler. I'm going to do you right. So, but no, I'd be glad to help you out. If you guys have a deal, you're not sure how to partner, don't know what to do next, I'm glad to do that too. Yeah, that's all I got. Thanks, guys.